Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Beyond the Hood with TractorZoom. I'm your host, Andy Campbell, and I have the distinct pleasure today to be joined by Brian Weaver, Director of Network Development for North America for Case IH and New Holland. And I'll get in a moment to explain more about Brian and his roles. But Brian, first of all, thank you for joining us.
I appreciate it, Andy. I love the opportunity to be able to kind of talk about, business and, just have the chance to connect with, anybody involved in the ag side and, industrial part of the business and, look forward to the discussion.
Good. And, on that note, looking forward to the discussion. One of the things that we just mentioned before I hit record here when Brian was saying what he's really involved with at CNH is helping dealers, work outside of the business, work on the business instead of being stuck inside of it all the time, and enabling that to happen, which I thought really meshed well with what we do here in Beyond the Hood, with the true purpose of looking beyond the hood. And so we're going to get into a lot of that. I'll pressure you on what it is that you are doing to enable those Case IH dealers, those New Holland dealers now, to look beyond the hood. But before we get into too much of the technicals, I want to give a little bit of a background about Brian so everybody listening to the podcast can kind of understand his role and then how he's helping dealers do what they do. So, like I mentioned, Brian is the Director of Network Development for North America, Case IH, and now New Holland. And that's a very recent change that we can go into if you'd like, Brian. But in this position, Brian works directly with dealers on performance standards, strategic growth, and operational fundamentals, and truly ones that separate the thriving stores from the ones that might be struggling. So throughout Brian's career in the ag equipment industry, where he started at AGCO as a demand planning, sales support, and product specialist, also did some territory management roles. And now at CNH, he's advanced through Director of Commercial Operations and Director of Sales before moving into this network development role, really shifting his focus from driving sales to strengthening those dealer organizations that are responsible for the sales. Brian brings a perspective that few others can offer, which is why I'm excited to have him here on the show. It's just a view from the OEM side across hundreds of dealerships as this industry really navigates a lot of challenges. We've got pressures around technology adoption, consolidation, and just rising customer expectations and tightening margins on their side. So outside of CNH, Brian serves as the chair of the Racine Area Manufacturers and Commerce, which is a pro-business and pro-community organization that they have up there in Wisconsin. So, Brian, again, I'm going to take a breather here and welcome you to Beyond the Hood.
No, great. Appreciate it, Andy. As you kind of mentioned, the different parts of the, career that I've had, certainly enjoying, the ag space, which has been, the predominant focus of the roles that I've been in, and, the relationships that you develop, either with colleagues or the dealers themselves, and where the business, happens out in the market, the places you're able to travel. I did not grow up, on a farm and get into ag that way, but I did kind of grow up in the manufacturing ag space, with some family, heritage there. So I've always been around equipment, been around, kind of the dealers and the people interested in advancing ag, and it's just been, very rewarding to be a part of that, and, can continue to find ways to strengthen the bond between, CNH and dealers and certainly customers themselves.
Good. And I appreciate that little bit of background about how you got into this industry, because I just came back from a conference and sitting down talking with a lot of dealers. Everybody had a different route into this industry, and it wasn't all. There's actually just very few that came in through the farming route, and so it's always a neat just practice to see how everybody else got to the same table. But I think that's important too. It's not, you don't want everybody to come in through the same stream, because then they don't bring in the same perspectives. And so I appreciate the diversity that you're bringing and a little bit of that background.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the pathways are diverse, and it does help, whether it's the discussions that you have to even the questions that maybe others that might be asking, well, why do you do it this way or that way? And maybe that's, if you find your answer, well, that's the way we've always done it, it's maybe a good time to look at that and
right.
and reevaluate, is that the approach. So the value that of the diversity people can add to the discussions and decisions is really where businesses can help self-reflect and understand if it's time to adapt or evolve and or reinforce hey, this is what's working, let's continue to do this and make sure everybody understands why we do it that way.
Okay. On that note, then, of helping others and bringing perspective to the table, your title is network development. And what does that actually mean in practice? And what does your day-to-day look like?
I'm still looking for like the routine day, and then maybe what to expect as you kind of come in. You sort of, you have things on your calendar and as you're monitoring and talking about different decisions that come up. But, network development, there is no routine. We have, just like within, CNH, we have a diverse background, and folks involved in the business. Our dealer body, it's a wide range, of a lot of it family-oriented businesses passed down, generation to generation, and their needs, differ, with each coming year. Some dealers are, maybe it's a discussion about adding a product line, that they haven't had in the past and want to expand their portfolio that way. It might be transitioning from an offering that they have to, one of our offerings, and we certainly engage and love to have those discussions. And, at other times, maybe it's their ownership structure. It's, family members ready to talk about what the next level of leadership, whether that's family or, others that have, can kind of fill that space and continue on the business. And so, we facilitate in those conversations. And some dealers are on a growth path and want to understand where their strategic thoughts are on a footprint discussion, and we have quite a bit of those going on at a regular basis. And then there's the other end of that. They come to the time or the transition time and want to know what those options are. So any of those kind of few items tend to pop up pretty regularly, and you want to make sure that the dealer body has the understanding of where the manufacturer sits, and for us to gain the understanding of what their interests are, and they can get the most out of what they've built, and kind of have their legacy represented the way that they would like to see it.
Mm-hmm. So when you have to traverse this path and try to figure out what it is that they want, but you're also sitting right in the middle with what it is that CNH wants. And so when you look at that and thinking of it more from the CNH perspective now, what are they really trying to accomplish with your dealer network in 26 and even maybe into 27? What are their goals, or what's your guiding North Star when you're looking at the OEM perspective?
And there is several different lenses you sort of have to use. From a strict manufacturer, you'd love to make sure the buildings are all well invested and have capacity, and the lots are full of CNH product, and everything is bright and shiny. That's what you'd like to see, but then you have to understand the capital needs to do that, and to support those kind of investments. And especially in 25 and 26, ag market is a tough one. Margins are are thinner than what we would like. We're in just kind of one of those parts of the cycle, and we have to be cautious, because you do have to balance what the capital requirements are to represent the brands you need to, but when's the right time to do that? And I think as we look at how we would like the brands to be represented, you sort of need to do that on a constant basis. I think when we find we're avoiding some of those reinvestment opportunities in the business, and it could be bricks and mortar, it could be personnel or trucks or software packages. I mean, there's a wide range of different investments that the businesses need to evaluate. But those that do it, sort of on an ongoing basis, rather than finding those kind of more cliff events or climb the mountain kind of events where, there's a lot to that maybe needs to get done. So you want to make sure those discussions are happening on an ongoing basis, and the business is keeping up with what customers are looking for. So from a manufacturer standpoint or from a network, you do have to be aware there is only so much capital, and they need to be profitable. They need to make sure they can reinvest and be there through the up markets, through the challenging markets, so you can have too much stress on sort of those manufactured needs, and you try to find the right balance. And I think from a network, and you said we sort of fit in that, maybe in that middle space. The dealer might, they're going to be cautious with some of that, and they are looking at the customer needs and what they want to do. But you also have to look at it from a future and or even a current employee of that dealership, and what do they look at when they walk in, and is this a place they want to work? Is it well lit? Is it what's the climate control? What's happening across the street? Do they have options? So as you kind of take into account the dealer, the employee, the manufacturer, and even a customer, are they comfortable walking in? Is it laid out the way they would like to have it? Who is walking in, and what is their typical customer? What do they think about? So I think taking the multiple lenses, view of what they're trying to accomplish at that dealership, and from a network, we try to balance all of that. And while we still advance, the brand identity, the equity in the brands, and we build some consistency so people know what to expect when they walk into whether it's a New Holland or a Case IH store, and they know those are premium products, and they're operating with dealers that are highly capable to take care of that equipment and the customer needs.
So on your point there, where you're mentioning, there's a limited amount of capital at times, there's a limited amount of time and resources at other times, but yet the perspective, whether it's the customer, whether it's the employee or future employee walking in, that matters a whole lot. So there's many things you can do to improve a dealership, but only some things you can do, given the resources you have. What is it that you look for? Maybe one or two things that you look for when walking into a dealership or opening up a dealership's financials and sitting down with them to review those. Do you see one or two things that really help separate out those high-performing operations?
I think there's, to narrow it down to one, I think it's a collection of what is the feeling that you get? What is there's the kind of the visual assessment before you walk in, and I had a dealer reference this in one of our meetings, and I really liked it. But what is the engagement level when you walk in the door? As an employee, if they're walking, they spot you. Are they walking towards you? How can I help you? What are you looking for? What are some of your needs? Or are they pivoting and walking away to avoid maybe a challenge or something? So what's that engagement? And that can certainly mean a lot. Is it welcoming? Is it kind of well understood to find what they need? It's so there is kind of the visual assessment that you get initially, and from a manufacturer, you certainly want your products displayed the right way, the signage to be the way it needs to be, a nice clean environment, high exposure. But right when you open the door, what happens? And I a lot of times when we're walking in, we have different meetings set up, and we may know which room to be going towards, or office. Customers might be walking to the parts counter or the service area, or even walking back to the service bays. But what is that engagement? And I think it's pretty telling. And the specific dealer had sort of a rule that they gave their employees, which I certainly appreciated and like to think about it that way.
That's fantastic. That's actually the first time that I've heard that explicitly laid out like that. But then, as I think back through my time walking into many different dealerships, or even any other retail operation outside of the equipment space, then you start to notice that is a big differentiator in how I perceive that business, and then also what my next action is. Like, am I also engaged as a customer to be there, and how likely am I to want to go back into this space? That's a good perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, so outside of that one, then I want to take you maybe to a slightly longer term view. Do you have one piece of advice for sustainably growing a dealership, even considering now that we're almost 6 months into 2026, and it's a tough time to grow an ag dealership? So, one piece of advice that could help a dealership grow sustainably.
Yeah, the year's going fast already. It feels like you're starting to plan what you're going to accomplish in 26, and you're halfway through. But and we've seen this with dealers. And there's a lot of different leadership makeups. How they're running operationally day to day, and the different exposure that those different groups might be pretty limited to their span of control or their department. Where we've seen some benefits is they opening up the books, making sure that level of the business, or even down to however low they're in the organization or depth of the organization they're comfortable with, but understanding some of the challenges that the ownership group faces, and why they may have to make certain decisions or different impacts, and making sure the employees understand the high level, how this operates. How does a business generate the revenue? Where are the costs? Where can they help control some of those costs? You could take the lens of the financial lens, and just making sure that awareness. Everybody comes into the dealership with different experiences that they've built up, and knowledge, and I think sharing how a business actually runs and makes money and able to reinvest is an important aspect, just as much as the role that they might be doing, and then you start to see employees kind of cross over those different departments, and can kind of understand decisions that they may be making may be good for their area. However, that's a burden on another. And that's where the strength starts to develop. I mean, we see that with C&H. You can see that with with the dealership. You can extend it to even a customer satisfaction aspect of it too. What is the different things of of awareness that we can be doing that impact customers? Are you maybe there was a big service bill, and how did you introduce that cost? Was it communicated, proactively, was the updates, happening along the way? Did you make that phone call and just, make sure they understood and explained, what they should expect? And a lot of times that can, certainly assist in the, some of the more challenging, bills that people would have to pay. So a lot of it can come down to communication and being intentional with that. Dealers bringing different members of their group to conferences and group 20 type sessions, and really making sure they understand it, and that they can bring that back to their area of focus, and be a stronger employee for the organization.
Yeah, we've even seen that, as a service provider for dealers, increasing the transparency, better communication helps within our organization, but also helps from organization to other organization. It just, again, it gets back to that clear communication and understanding of expectations. But that's good. Now, maybe on the same vein, actually, my next question is more on communication from OEM to dealer and market share. Obviously, growing market share is always a big goal for OEMs, and then dealers obviously play a major role in that. And this is just me being curious, how do you think about prescribing growth goals, knowing that everybody's territory is different? I mean, I even look at this year, and the growth opportunity could be really challenging in Kansas and Arkansas, Tennessee, given the drought and the heavy commodities in wheat or cotton, versus other areas of the country that might be flush with rain and doing fairly well in dairy or beef cattle. So so many moving parts. How do you guys go about doing that?
Yeah, market share is usually a fun, topic, between manufacturers and dealers, and I think really understanding what it is, why CNH or other OEMs so concentrated on market share, and how does that translate to a dealer, and so we do try to spend some time to reinforce why we concentrate on it a lot. A lot of our production planning starts with what is the industry. We need to make large component decisions and get that in the supply base and coming our way well in advance of really when you understand what market you're playing in. So that starts with what is driving the industry. What's the the farm side look like? What is some of the construction business and their impacts on it, and we start to build in the discussion of long-term planning. And through that, your inventory levels, what you'd like to sell to get your, fair shot at that market. And it leads to the production conversations that we need to have internally. So we spend a lot of time making sure we're keeping up. It's a measurement, but it's the way I like to explain it. It's, it can be, a lot of times it's deemed a goal, but it's really the result. It's the result of doing a lot of things really well. If you're growing market share, it's the reflection of the customer base that they see the value of your product, the value of your dealership, the service aspect of all of that, and it's that positive reaction. And then it's a good measurement, to reflect on, are you having that impact in the market? What are the things that are actually driving market share? And really trying to dive into those pieces and look at those ingredients and work on that part. The other part, is largely, a population discussion and future parts and service business, which is the really sustainable part of a dealership. As an OEM, you start to see market share decline. That population is going to go down, and some of that, yes, could be industry related as a total, but are we at least keeping up with our fair share to maximize that population? And as you start to see that
population of machines, right?
population of machines, yeah,
Okay.
and future parts and service. So if we see that starting to decline, that does raise some flags, and that puts risk to the future parts and service business, which is really the lifeblood. When we sell machines to get the parts and service support, and really, that's a really what keeps the dealerships going. So
Right.
that whole good is really the entry point. And so as you kind of start to see that go up or down, it's the future financial impacts that we're concerned about. Even though you're losing some potential at the current year, it's that future part that we want to get in front of and try to if it's going in a reverse way, find out what's happening there, try to get involved, buy yourself some time to reverse that, or if you're growing share, learn what are the best practices, what's driving that. Can you share that in other places and duplicate it, and kind of learn from the positive side as well. But it's the result of doing things well, and that's what I try to echo when I'm having market share type discussions, and it's a good, fair measurement of kind of how we're collectively doing, OEM and the dealer, and the reaction of the customer base.
Oh, that's good. And what you mentioned earlier, and I've never thought about it this way, of it's a necessary input to long-term production planning. And I come from a manufacturing background, and my supply chain was not nearly as long of lead time as what you guys have to deal with. So I can only imagine that trying to get some of that certainty that you need in order to deliver the parts and the whole goods pieces that everybody out there as an end consumer needs when they need it. But then bringing to your most recent comment, though, on it's a result, not necessarily just a metric of doing things well. And I want to use that as a transition point here of, doing things well and doing things differently, because, adoption of new technologies is certainly challenging. Adoption of any new business practices can be challenging, but it also can be beneficial. And so, does CNH have an official position or even a preference when it comes to dealers adopting integrated software platforms like inventory management, quoting, customer communication? There's a plethora of options out there. Does CNH push that? Do they have a preference? What are your thoughts?
I think there's a few slices there. I mean, technology offerings, get introduced to the market certainly at a quicker pace than new equipment. So there are a lot to consider. Even internally in our uses and at dealers, it's not so much do you have the information? It's sorting through the information to make to get effective and efficient. So yes, we are very open to new technologies. We're not going to be the expert on everything in regards to, say business system or, CRMs. So we've been flexible on the different choices dealers might have out there. There's a balance, to that. We do want to move fast with integrations. There's the piece that we can help dealers with is their information within the CNH, body or organization that would be more beneficial to streamline and integrate with some of that technology. We feel there is, as there would be value, with information coming back to us, such as helping us understand, retail pace, quoting pace. All that helps us, make different production decisions. And the quicker we can make that, the more accurate we can make that. We can, monitor costs and be careful on that end. So, I certainly we're open, and we would like to have, at this point probably more integrations with fewer. But we always have to leave that space open to where there is something that's going to be introduced, next week, month, year. That's, is it revolutionary? Is it just an efficiency gain? And I don't think we would be wise to kind of close ourselves off. So and we haven't. But we do have to be careful that we're not having so many different connections. We now aren't as effective with so many. So there's a balance of kind of having the openness, but also being able to do more with a limited technology setup.
Right. It gets back to kind of the adage that you can do everything, but you would essentially do then nothing well, and so you do need to
exactly
select it down because you can't really do everything well. But to your point, I thought one thing that was interesting that you mentioned of seeing information upstream and having an effect what you're doing downstream. And I know, just talking with a lot of dealers, this can be a contentious point at times of sharing information back and forth. But at the essence of it all, for you as a manufacturer, being able to see upstream at least the interest, the quoting, numbers does help for production planning downstream. And like we mentioned, it is a very long lead time. And so the more insight that you can have there, the more on time the production can be, the lower your costs can be. There's obviously a lot of benefit, but it gets back to what you talked about earlier with clear communication. It gets back to just good business practices of transparency, clear communication. And so I think, from what we've seen, at least sitting on the same side of the table, working through some of these things and having clear communication can collectively help out the whole good. It doesn't have to be all one or the other, or none or all, if that makes sense.
Yeah, agreed. And there is a comfort level you and maybe even a trust level you have to get with and be protective of private information or make sure that it's not harmful in any way, but it's productive, mutual benefit to both sides. And you see that evolve versus
Right.
10 years ago to where it's going, not just in our space, but almost any application they may have on their phone or TV or whatever it is. But there is efficiency, there is value to both sides. How can we play our part to help promote more interest of the brands in the dealership in their area, to drive some leads into the channel. The simplification to, recognize which ones are, the closest to making that purchase decisions, which ones need a little bit more time, and how do you market to those different groups at those different stages? When is it the proper time to maybe present them a demo, a quote, and then now you've sold, something and you go into the aftermarket, and how do you keep that cycle just, reoccurring, and find the different customers that you can attract by doing that. And there's a lot of systems and software that can assist with those. And for an OEM to be a part of that, for us to understand that value of understanding that cycle and the effectiveness of it, we can help control inventory, which leads to the production, discussions. The retail impact, even month to month, changes your inventory level, which, if you're on plan, your production level could be, properly set. If you're, not as effective in that retail space, you're growing inventory, you might have to make production conversations, or the other way, you're being very effective and we may need to think about additional supply. And, we certainly like those years.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Still on the technology discussion, I got one more question there. You mentioned a lot of the different operations within a dealership. Do you see an operational gap, or maybe what's the biggest operational gap that you see at dealerships today that you do think technology could help close?
I mean, from our lens, and I don't know if it's just at the dealership, but I probably go back and point to that communication and coordination, possibly of the different departments. What is the sales team, actively doing, and that activity is going to drive, business for maybe the service department to get equipment ready, or to get onboarded or getting ready to go to the field. And I think any large organization, communication tends to be some of that gap. So how do you surface, what's the most important at that time? How do what are the priorities of the organization, the departments, different customer needs that are popping up. So and the impacts you might be that you're making decisions day in, day out, and what pipeline are you building for other groups to be aware of. So the more time you can give people to sort through the challenges or workload, often the results tend to be a little bit better. But we often find ourselves thinking just from kind of that single department lens, and opening that up and understanding the challenges and where others can contribute can certainly help. But yeah, I think certainly as dealerships grow, as what we've been seeing, organizations grow, that communication channel is often one that's has to be constantly worked on. What's the most effective way? Writing an email and said "I told you," isn't quite the same anymore. Because now you have email, you have your text, you have a Teams chat, or coming through that channel, and maybe somebody called you and left you a voicemail. So you're often trying to keep up on all the communication that's out, but sometimes walking over in front of somebody and having that discussion and really talking through it is getting back to more of traditional method, and it's still the most meaningful.
Right. It is really that idea of just sending a message. It doesn't necessarily work because there's not that natural feedback loop of I saw you, I told you, and now I have a confirmation that you heard it. We've even seen that within some of our electronic communications within our tools of just a simple confirming as a response back to a chat or whatever. It does something similar, but it's small, but it's significant because you just can't throw things over on the other side and expect it to get done.
Agreed.
Okay, well, I want to take this a little bit more forward-looking now, and I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I just got back from a conference where the focus was looking out into the future. Obviously, within the ag economy now, we're in a bit of a slump, and the biggest question the conference I was just at was, when are we going to come out of this? You could say we're 2026 now. We're probably 2 years in to this, and not entirely sure if people know when we're going to come out. But I'm more interested in your perspective on what trends or forces that you expect to see reshape the dealer landscape, maybe over the next 2 or 5 years. And it could be anything from consolidation, technology, customer expectations. I think you come from a unique lens, so I'm just interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, certainly agree. The downturn is certainly still correcting, but we're seeing signs. You start to see some stability in the used values that the dealers need to put in to make sure there's protection there, and those hold up. The used turns, the financial metrics, starting to show some stability. We get to look at the order boards and understand what that demand cycle is, and you try to balance all those pieces to understand, or what kind of velocity are we going to get to when it starts to tick up. But there, as we look at the next few years, consolidation, it's been happening for a long period of time, and it really starts at the customer level. Customers are, the amount of customers that are producing, the commodities that we have are fewer and fewer. Farms are getting larger, so we're seeing some expansion that way. Dealers are needing to stretch themselves a little bit to have the diversity of customers to protect their business. And then you also see it at the manufacturer level, some consolidation, over the last few years. And in the environments like we've been in, you see a little bit of acceleration with that. So the amount of producers and dealers will continue to shrink. They'll cover more geography. That's not a new phenomenon. I think we'll see some acceleration with that as we go. And as you do get bigger, the need to be aware and what's going on in that large a footprint, when maybe you can't get at a certain point, a dealership grows in size. You go from when you can almost touch every aspect of the business, and you see it, you can handle it, and you see almost that owner operator type mentality. And you get to a certain size footprint, that really becomes a challenge. Right. And then you got to start relying on a leadership team, and then you expand even further, and you can kind of see it, whether it's just the distance, things are away from each other, the amount of stores, the diversity of the customers. A lot of different things can stretch the kind of leadership you need to be effective in the marketplace. So as the dealers grow, I see that dynamic continuing to be stressed. The amount of people with the experience you need to get in those spaces and be effective is sometimes tough to find. So dealers need to be developing that talent, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, having that exposure of the financials or different impacts between departments, help those people grow. Are you attracting the new talent? Technician availability has been one of the biggest limitations to growth. And so how are you effective in the service side? Are you at capacity? Do you need to grow capacity? Do you have enough techs to fill those bays? Do you have a development program, to talk to even early school, middle school, to let them know these are career choices? That's an industry issue. But right. Those that aren't as involved with those development needs are the ones kind of struggling to fill the service bays up, because you look at even the service techs today, there's probably more retiring than there are coming in, and that's going to hit kind of a crossover period where we're really struggling. So we have to fill that void. We need to let people know this is a good industry to be in. There's career paths here. There's growth here, and it's one that we need to fill pretty rapidly, as the equipment needs to support it isn't just the turning the iron and turning the wrench. It's, it is the software and the equipment and understanding how to diagnose, how to troubleshoot, and how to help, kind of customers through, the different needs they have. And then with that, it goes to kind of the software and different opportunities. Dealers need to really evaluate, how can we be effective? How can you service the decisions that need to be made? Where are some of the pain points happening? And those that have the culture and the ability to tackle those and be effective at it, I think we'll have, better chance of seeing some of that growth and customers responding to those types of organizations. So it's an interesting time. There's a lot of precision, acceleration and tech, that's been going on for a long time. Dealerships are growing in size. You have, employment base that's, everybody's going to be searching out for that kind of talent to run dealerships. And you really got to stand out. The employees have choices. And I think that self-reflection, of saying, is this where I need this role? Is this where somebody's going to look at it and want to work here? We do the same thing for C&H. You kind of owe that. How do you attract that talent and keep them there? The loyalty level isn't quite the same as it used to be. So it's very it can be certainly a challenge, but I think those that are engaged in it often and early and doing that self-reflection stay on top of some of those things.
Huh. So when you're mentioning that, I mean, my mind went back to where we started the conversation of not working necessarily in the business, but being able to work on the business and look out to those other things that will help your business, but maybe more long term. So whether it's the outreach to the local high school or maybe a local tech college to foster those incoming techs, or to build up the community and the customer relationship outside, all that takes a little bit of time and is very challenging for an owner operator to do, right? Because you're working in the business, like we were mentioning. And so again, my mind's going a bunch of different ways. I'm trying to focus this down in a question for you, and I didn't prep you with this question, so I apologize. I'm springing this on you.
Try to be ready.
Right. So as a dealership expands, or even wants to do better, is there like a demarcation line of after 2 locations, or maybe you mentioned different industries, maybe you're semi-rural or maybe semi-urban, so you're dealing with 2 different types of customer bases, and that's enough. At what point should an owner or a dealer principal realize, like, okay, hey, I have so much opportunity in front of me or so much going on kind of below me, I need to separate now, and now is, I need to be, working on the business. Like, is there a number of locations, a number of industries you're in, when that actually should become apparent? I don't know the answer to it, but
I don't know if there's a perfect answer to it. I think sometimes you understand it after you're already in it, in that situation, and you've kind of, find yourself chasing, the issues rather than, being in front of them and, anticipating them. And I think when you find you're in that environment, you've probably gone too far, or you need to reevaluate. You're unable to stay in front and anticipate. It's probably the best. And for some people, that might be going from 1 store to 2. That might be even a single store, but you've had enormous growth and your customer base has expanded, and even for some that could be the kind of the mechanism that stretches the current leadership style or approach. And when do you need to start trusting your leadership and giving them the ability, not only to make the decisions, but give them the ability to fail and learn. And it's until they really get into some of the situations, they don't, it's a hard time for them to kind of feel comfortable and, as they grow in a certain capacity. So I think there's probably a store level or account or geography size that triggers that. But I think for each individual, it could be a little bit different. And it's that time that you find yourself unable to be in front of your opportunities and challenges. And it's not as much as you're getting challenged all the time, but you might be missing some growth opportunities, and you're spending time developing customers. You're spending time developing employees. And kind of maximizing the value of the dealership, and understand what the customers are saying about you, and promoting the dealership, promoting the brands, and and from a kind of a leadership aspect, you got to be able to kind of see all that and be aware of those pieces and interactions, and adapt when you need to. So I think if you find yourself more in the day to day, you might be stretching yourself from a leadership side a little bit too far, and time to evaluate, is this how we can sustain ourselves? Is it sustainable to do this? And what's happening to us long term if we don't adapt?
Huh, that's good. I love the phrase that you used of when you find yourself chasing. That's probably about the time that you should have done it already, but now you need to probably take action. And that kind of becomes a one size. It works for many different sizes, of whether it's a one-store dealership or a many-store dealership. But if you find yourself chasing now, this is actually going to morph into one of my final questions for you, then, Brian, is if a dealership does find themselves chasing. Obviously, you're a huge resource for CNH dealers. And so if they want to build a better relationship with CNH, with yourself, or somebody like yourself, just to get more attention so they don't chase, so they have the resources available, so they can build onto the business, what advice would you give them in order to take that next step?
I think one of the biggest values, just from a CNH aspect, we have an abundance of our staff is field-based. We know where the business, gets done. It's supporting the dealer body out there, and opening up, the understanding of what they want to accomplish, doing that long-term planning. We're highly excited and like to be involved in those discussions. It helps us, kind of collectively understand what we need to do as a manufacturer. So understanding strategic goals. Are there strategic goals? What is, how does a dealership differentiate themselves? A lot of times, we've been through different sessions, and you sort of ask them, what do you do best? How do you stand out? Well, how many of them in the room say, well, it's our service. And it probably is very good. But if everybody's the best service, is that really how you stand out? And it's, what's the culture? What's the message? What's the, the customer attraction that makes the dealership, kind of be that attraction point for customers. So I think it goes back again to just, taking a step back or out, and trying to monitor and understand what's happening. We have different resources that we can assist, and if we can be involved before things get a little bit too far down the track, where we're missing those opportunities, it's certainly easier. But be open, and open to kind of understanding if you're growth minded, you want to be competitive, you're looking to reinvest and kind of expand their dealership and in our brands, and we want to be engaged with that as much as possible and maximize CNH. Maximize what the dealers can do. If the dealers are winning, we're winning, and there's mutual benefit. So we're interested in their success. And as much alignment as possible. We want to fill their equipment needs as much with CNH products, and the way we're organized now kind of fits that even further than how we've done that in the past. But utilize us.
Good. And I'm excited to kind of see where this goes with CNH being more tightly aligned. And I think this also may be a good way to wrap it up too, because your advice on approach things with an open mind and a growth mindset. Not only is it great advice for a dealer and a dealer principal to be able to take, but it goes all the way down from the very ground level. The first time employee, anybody comes in, whether it's here in Tractor Zoom or in a dealership, having an open mind, a growth mindset of you can continually improve is great. And then I'm sure you see this at the manufacturer level as well, from the the brand new employee to the person about ready to retire. it's really what starts to differentiate personal performance and even team cultures and team performance.
No, I agree. In culture is something that's hard, and it can develop if you're not working on it. It's going to develop itself, and it may not be the way you're wanting it to, and you find yourself, needing to take some action that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. You have to be intentional with it. Sometimes it's not, the funnest thing to think you have to work on, but the employee feedback, the customer feedback, interdepartment. If you see conflict, are you working through that, and understanding the different sides of what's how that's developed, and it goes for any business I've seen. We've seen it. We've done a large undertaking and are seeing a lot of benefit from just the awareness that is something that you gotta have to have it on the table, and you have to be. It has have to be consistent with it, and identifying what helps, what hurts, and helps you onboard new employees, helps you, kind of talk through different situations that could arise. And we see that, it happens at the dealerships too. And I think at times we get the dealers, and, whether they're different, workshops are going on, and, somebody brings up a situation, you see a lot of consistency or recognition that they see that very similar conflict between certain departments, and you got to have a pathway through how you can be efficient and kind of assist the way through that.
Yep, very much so. Okay, Brian. Well, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the perspective that you're able to give us from a manufacturer down to your dealer. And I know we really appreciate working with a lot of the CNH dealers out there too. So, again, thank you for joining us on Beyond the Hood, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it very much.
Okay. Thank you to all our listeners out there. And again, if you haven't subscribed yet, you can do so on all your social channels and wherever you catch this podcast. Look forward to catching you next time, whether it's on our equipment trends, market insights, or these great guest interviews that we have with Beyond the Hood. Thank you, and take care, everyone.